Have you ever wondered about the recruiting process? That's what we talk about today on the Brand New You Show as we welcome our first guest. Are you ready? Let's go! Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Brand New You Show. I'm your host, Ryan Roden, and today I am very excited to bring you our first guest, Tim Saumier, President and CEO of Tyges International. Tyges is an executive search firm that specializes in manufacturing and healthcare placements. Prior to establishing Tyges, Tim held various positions in manufacturing, such as master scheduling, logistics and supply chain management, as well as change and program management. He has worked for companies the likes of Philips, Moen, and John Deere. Now at the helm of Tyges, he is on a mission to reinvent recruiting with resolve because, as Tim sees it, everything about recruiting must change. Tim, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be on it. It's a pleasure to be your first guest, too.
Well, it shows a pioneering spirit, just like you showed when you moved out of the corporate ranks to start the Tyges several years ago.
Thank you.
So as you can imagine, I'm actually very excited to kind of see the recruiting process from your side of the table. But before we get into that, I want to open things up with just a couple of icebreaker questions, starting with, if you could choose only one place to go on vacation for the rest of your vacation days, where would you go?
The South Island of New Zealand.
So have you been to the South Island of New Zealand?
I have. My wife and I visited there when she was 3 months pregnant with my first child. And we flew over to Australia first. It was a trip we were on, going to Sydney and spending some time in the mountains. We said, well, let's go to visit New Zealand. And, well, at the end of the Sydney trip, we said, all right, let's go get the rest of this trip over. We flew into New Zealand. Probably the most beautiful place I've ever been in my life. Just gorgeous.
Everybody, I had two things. One, you just described the trip that my wife and I have been talking about taking before my oldest son leaves the house in a couple of years.
Nice.
But two, everybody that I've talked to who's ever been to New Zealand says exactly the same thing. So
stunning.
It just makes me want to go even more.
Good. I would encourage you.
So I'd imagine if you're like me, you're probably taking a book with you on your vacation. And it's been said that readers are leaders. So I'm interested to know what nonfiction book you're reading right now and or have finished recently.
Yeah, I'm reading a book called Build to Sell. And I can't remember who it's by, to be honest with you, because I just started reading it. But basically, it talks about how you build a company for sale. Not necessarily to sell it, but how do you build it so it's not about you? A lot of entrepreneurs struggle with building a company. They tend to build the business around them. I fell into that same trap early on. But this is a good book. It's a nonfiction book, but it's written in a fiction format, which I think is pretty intriguing. It makes it fun to read. So I think it's called Build to Sell.
To sell, S-E-L-L?
Yes.
All right. Well, that's going to get put into my Amazon wish list here before the end of today.
Nice.
All right. So I'm going to move on to something I'm going to call pick one and why. So I'm going to give you two choices. I want you to choose one, and you tell me why you picked it.
Okay.
Would you prefer to be called a salesperson or a headhunter?
I'd rather be called a headhunter.
And why is that?
Yeah, a salesperson, I guess I would be a non-traditional recruiter. I didn't come out of sales. I came out of operations or supply chain, as you were kind enough to tell people about early on. And a salesperson always has that connotation with being dirty, slimy, and that's, again, Tim Saumier's opinion. A headhunter, I've had numerous people call me and say, so you're a headhunter, and then they go, oh, I'm sorry. And no, I embrace that. When you look at the application of what we do for a living as a headhunter, we are hired to go out and find people, not go out and mine boards, put postings on boards, and wait for people to come to us. We're hired to intentionally go out and get people. And that is the phrase, the headhunter phrase was coined years ago by I don't know who, but I embrace that because that's what I do for a living. I go introduce opportunities to people and allow the magic to work from there. Sales, I don't feel like I'm selling anything. I'm introducing things. I'm finding people. That's how I would describe it.
Okay. So speaking of the people that you're finding, those job seekers, what would you prefer they were called, candidates or clients?
Clients, all day, every day. One of the big things that I look at is the humanity of people. I was the guy that was getting recruited back in the day when I was with John Deere and prior to that with Moen. And you always felt like you were treated like a commodity. As long as they had a need for you right then and there, they treated you like that. And so the term candidate has been something used. It's in all the CRMs. It's in all of our write-ups and all that. So I can tell you from Tyges' perspective, I am switching that mentality, investing in changing the term to clients. And people say, well, how are you going to differentiate between the company and the individual? I said, well, we'll call them company and individuals because guess what? They're a person. There's a humanity side of this piece of it. So both sides are clients to me. If both clients aren't happy, I'm not happy.
Okay, fair enough. And I'll apologize in advance if I slip and refer to job seekers as candidates because it is deeply ingrained, exactly. I think, not just in recruiters, but in candidates, job seekers as well. That's kind of the way we've been taught to look at ourselves.
Yep. Everybody uses it.
Yeah, exactly. So last one here under the pick one and why category. What do you think is more important today, a good resume or a good online presence?
I would tell you a good online presence, bar none. I can convince my companies that I work with as clients to talk to an individual without a resume. What I can't convince them of is if they're out in social media, on Facebook, and they're using foul language or inappropriate videos or whatever, I can't convince them to talk to them then.
Okay, that's good. And if you don't mind, I'll stop you there because there's a few questions I have very specific to those activities here in a few more minutes.
Sure.
Because I felt like you were getting ready to go there, and I want to hold off until I get to those questions.
Very good.
So, while we're talking about just the recruiting process in general, what if anything, have you seen change about the recruiting process as a whole, specifically on the company side? So you mentioned you have two clients. When we're talking about this client, I'm referring to the companies. What do you think has changed in that process with them since the end of this Great Recession?
Good question. What I would say is probably the biggest change, and you're starting to see it even more so, I'd say over the last few months. They're starting to recognize that it is not a company-centric market anymore. And not everybody gets it, especially the HR community. I would tell you that they're the last to get it. But your typical hiring managers that are specifically looking for a certain person with certain credentials, certain backgrounds, recognize that it is more of an individual-centric market. That when they go out, the interview is two ways. It's not just one way. So an example would be, hey, we've got this job, Tim. Can you just go get us some people, bring them in, line them up. We'll pick the one we want. It doesn't work that way. And so that's starting to change. Back in 2009, people would have told you it was a company-centric market. And generally speaking, I would agree, with the exception of the high-caliber talent. I think it's always been an individual-centric market when you're a high-caliber talent out there. So we're seeing that shift take place today. HR, in my opinion, as a generalization, is lagging. I think it will come over the course of time. Hiring managers are starting to really understand that they've got to go after and convince people to come work with them.
Yeah, that's good to know. So that's the company side. Now, let's go to the job candidate side. Have you seen any changes on job candidates since the Great Recession as well, or even in just the last few years?
Well, I think after 2009, and I'd say for the last 8 years, maybe the individuals who thought that their companies were loyal to them and would take care of them saw how they were treated or mistreated or not treated well at all during that time frame. And so these individuals would not take phone calls from a guy like me. But I can tell you in the last, I'd say 8 years, even more so in the last couple of years, the receptivity to a phone call has gone through the roof. Everybody's willing to listen now. I would tell you that maybe we would have, let's say 25% were always looking for jobs. You'd find them on boards or whatever. Another 25% were receptive to listening. And then the balance would never take your calls or never return your calls. I would tell you 80+% are willing to listen now, at least the initial pitch, because they recognize that the employer is not that loyal anymore.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that aligns almost perfectly percentage-wise with the Gallup study that was put out, I think in 2013, that basically said that 70 to 80% of the employees that they talk to at companies are what they considered actively disengaged or disengaged. Meaning they're sitting there, they're taking up space in the chair, but they've lost that belief in the company. Excellent point. So it's interesting that you pulled that statistic out. So if you did your research on the Gallup beforehand, kudos, but it aligns perfectly with what they came out with. So I am curious, before you actually talk to a client, how much research do you do?
We do a little bit of what I'd say, not a little bit more than a little bit. We do quite a bit. Obviously, we're going to look up their website. We're going to do the financials. We're going to try to understand the competitive landscape. We're going to learn a little bit about the market we're recruiting to, whether we're recruiting to a certain city. We're going to try to understand the basics. But to be quite frank with you, when we are talking with a client, we're going to get more out of that than the research. We're going to learn why people go to work there. We're going to learn what are the advantages, what are the skeletons in the closet, what are the negatives of working there. And so the conversation with the client, whether it be over the phone or in person, are just as critical as the research before we get on the phone.
Okay. So that's the company client side. How about the job seeker side? How much research do you do before you ever contact a job seeker?
Normally less. I can tell you after we discuss it with them, we ask for references right after we do what we call an individual data sheet, where we take the individual and we take them through their life history. Part of that, we'll get references. We want to see if they respond with their references. But then after that, we obviously have a lot of opportunity to check social media, whether it be LinkedIn, Facebook, Pinterest. 10 years ago, there was really no open life. Today, everyone's life is pretty much open. And you can find out some things, whether you want to be representing these individuals to your clients and taking the risk of putting someone in front of them. A lot of this is just flat out maturity, because you know what? We're doing it. Some of our clients are doing it. But as time goes on, all of our clients are going to do it.
So you mentioned a few things there. I heard Pinterest, Facebook, Twitter. What's the number one way that you find job seekers or clients?
In our world, it's going to be referrals.
Okay.
We play in a space where it's pretty tight. We're niched inside of industrial manufacturing, and then specifically we deal with clinics that deal with children with autism. So the space is relatively small. And one thing you learn in this business, great people hang out with great people, and they connect us, and we connect them. And so that's what it's all about, is connecting the dots. The advent of all the boards, whether again LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, all of them, that's actually driven a lot more noise and caused a lot more confusion than is anything else. Because while you're on social media, you can lie, just like lying on your resume. Typically, where a lie doesn't come from is a good referral. I worked with so-and-so back in the day. He or she is outstanding at X. That's the best. That's the number one place we get our information from.
Okay. Have you ever had a referral from someone that you did go look at their information online and you found some questionable material, or you found something that just made you say, no, we have to completely pass these people over?
Absolutely.
Can you give me an example of a couple things that maybe you've seen, just generically, nothing specific, but just a couple things that when you see it, you immediately go, oh, wait a minute, this just isn't right?
Well, I can just see I can tell you a couple. One on Facebook. I saw some interactions just with some of the posts they were putting up. That's one example, and just inappropriate for a person with that level of maturity and that level of leadership. And if they're not smart enough to keep it off a public forum, that makes me question their decision-making process. The second one was easy. When we Googled the individual's name, guess what? They just said misdemeanor filed against them. Pretty, and I won't tell you what the misdemeanor, but something that we don't want to even be around.
Yeah.
And so that's the data is so easy to get at. I can pretty much find an individual pretty quickly and find out about them.
It's interesting you said that, because if I back up maybe 3 years ago, I started really kind of taking a look at myself. And one of the first things that I did was I went and Googled my name, and I found out two very interesting things. One, I was not the only Ryan Roten in the United States. And two, one of the other three Ryan Rotens, there are four of us, had just been arrested for dealing drugs a third time.
Nice.
And guess who was on the first page of Google 4 times?
Yeah,
that guy.
I can imagine. Exactly.
Yeah, so I've spent the last several years doing everything that I can to make sure that this Ryan Roten is the guy that shows up when you do your search.
Nice. And you hit it right in the nose there. For a recruiter, there's not one magical person that's going to fit a client's specs. And so we're going to mitigate the risk. People say, well, why wouldn't you take the time to figure out which Ryan Roten you were dealing with? Well, you got to understand, we're moving at a pretty good pace. And we also understand that our job is to get the client 3 to 4 solid professionals that fit the criteria, are motivated and ready to do this job, and get them in front of the client. If I have to stop and go do a background check on somebody that I don't even know will take the job or be interested in the job, it's going to be very difficult. It takes too much time. So we're moving on as recruiters.
Okay. I'm just curious, should every job seeker, in your opinion, have a personal career plan?
Absolutely. I just spoke at the Institute of Supply Management about 2 to 3 years ago. They asked me to speak at their annual conference in Baltimore, Maryland, and the subject was specifically around that. You should have a career. We talk about companies that do, when you're starting a company or starting a product line, you build a business plan. Well, we're nothing but a business. We have to have a business plan for us, a career plan that says, here's how I'm going to market myself. Here's what I expect. Here's what I bring to the table. All that. You should have something like that. We invest almost nothing into ours. Some of the resumes we see are atrocious, and those are a very small portion of a career plan. We don't put the investment there. And part of it's the online profile of the individual. That's important that you know what's out there and what's being said about you.
Okay. Do you think it's important for individuals to specialize in a particular niche or niche, or would you prefer to see candidates that have a little bit broader understanding of business?
Depends. If you're working in an engineering vertical and they're designing valves, I would tell you that it's important for that person to be a valve expert or understand a very similar product line. If you're working in a general management opportunity, you've got to scale through engineering, marketing, sales to really have a broader understanding of the business to really better serve the business. That's my opinion.
So we've spent some time now talking about what you look for as a recruiter and a job candidate. What should a job candidate look for in a recruiter?
Somebody that's in their specialty, first of all. First and foremost, if you're going to go out, you're going to identify that somebody's in your background. The hardest part that most recruiters do not share with an individual is they don't share with them that they are not there 100% of the time to help that person find a job. So the best thing they can do is partner with a recruiter that's in their space, that has a high level of integrity, that will return phone calls, but at the same time understand that the recruiter does not work for the individual. They work for the client who's paying the bills. And that's kind of a hard pill to swallow. I've had people say, you help people find jobs. I said, no. I said, sometimes that works that way. Really what we do is we are hired by companies to find people, specific people. And along the way, there are times when people are getting employed or looking for a new job that we're fortunate enough to find them a new job. But we're specifically paid to go get a specific set of skills, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
I think those are, so find somebody that you align with there, find somebody you trust, and find somebody that is known in the space, for lack of a better term. That's probably the best way for me to say it. And most of the recruiting population, what we call generalists. They'll do anything at any time, anyway. And I don't think you can be successful like that over the course of life. I think you have to specialize. And I think you've got to drill in. You've got to not just be a recruiter. You've got to be curious. You've got to know the market. You've got to know the players. You've got to know the competitive landscape. And you've got to go in deep and wide in that space. If you try to be everything to everybody, you can't be productive. It'd be like a manufacturer that makes cars. Today, tomorrow they make refrigerators. The next day they make furniture. There's no way. You can't get productive. You can't hire enough expertise to get there.
So we've selected somebody now. We've gone through the process. We understand what you're looking for, what the job seeker should look for. We're going to go into the interview, whether it be a telephone interview or an on-site interview. What advice would you give to someone who maybe has not interviewed in several years?
One thing about our process is we're talking to an individual. Part of our normal process is to prep people and prep them before and debrief them after every interview. The first thing I would tell you to do is partner with a recruiter who has a prep process and a debrief process and treats you like you're a human being versus a transaction. So that'd be the first advice I would give you. And that's hard to find. That's why I don't like to be called a salesperson. What's some advice I would give an individual? Well, we would talk about dress code. Dress to impress. Don't show up in a tuxedo, but put your best business suit on. No, there are exceptions to the rule that the recruiter should know about. If the client's telling them specifically, do not let them show up in this, make sure they wear steel-toed boots, but they should know what the dress code is. Bring some extra resumes with you. Make sure that you're cleaned up. Make sure this sounds basic, but you smell good. Take a shower. Don't wear perfume. Don't wear cologne. These are basics that, believe it or not, people don't get. And that's just getting yourself ready. When you leave the house, you're in interview mode because you do not know who's going to be driving down the street next to you. Could be the guy you're getting ready to interview with. Could be the guy, what about the gas station's pumping next to you? Be careful. Get your game face on when you leave the house. When you arrive, first person you greet, treat them with respect. You should do that anyways. Don't be fake. But because 9 times out of 10, they're going to come out front and ask the receptionist, "What'd you think of Joe? What was he like to deal with? Did he have people skills? Was he kind to you? Or did he dismiss you?" As you go through the process, you're going to, a good recruiter is going to know how they interview. What are the specifics of the interview? What's the structure of the interview? What kind of questions will they ask? What will be the flow of the interview? And there's a number of different interview processes. They should give you some insight on that. And if they don't know that, they should dig for it or give you the best possible way. So if I don't know, for whatever reason I can't get out the client, I tell people, remember 3 steps. Every interview is 3 steps. Step 1 is they're going to interview you. They're going to drive the bus. They're going to have a host of questions, probably going to be typically behavioral in some form or fashion. You want to respond with good examples from your past that relate to the question they're asking. When they're done interviewing with you, you want to have 3 or 4 questions centered around the job itself, the culture, the expectations of the role. Why do you want to ask them questions? This is where you build rapport with the client. This is where you get a chance to have the back and forth versus being one-sided. And the final step of the process, step 3, is close. Simple. Just if you're interested in the opportunity, tell them. If you're not, tell them. That's my view. So that's a simple interview prep that I would give someone.
Okay. What you may have answered it in there, but I'm going to ask this question anyway. What is it one thing you wish every candidate knew or at least considered before they walked into an interview?
I would want them to do the homework on the company.
Okay.
I would want them to know what this company is about. There are a lot of people that interview for the sake of interviewing, and that's it. They don't take it serious. Now, our job as recruiters to pull them, but sometimes they slip through. So I would say take it serious. Get to know the company.
So it's going to get asked. It gets asked at every interview, I think, that anybody has ever had in their lifetime. But how do you coach people to answer the dreaded "tell me about yourself" question?
Well, I tell them to practice it ahead of time. And it's a lot like an elevator speech, and it's the same thing that I tell people to put at the top of their resume right underneath where they're from. So, you have about 30 seconds to answer that question. And it's not a personal question. They don't want to know about your dog named Harry, that you grew up in where. What they want to understand is, give me a quick 30 to 60 second overview of your career history. How would you describe yourself? What are you known for? So, for example, I'm an executive recruiter with 12 years experience in executive recruiting in industrial manufacturing and healthcare. Prior to that, I spent 15 years in ops and supply chain with John Deere, Moen, and Phillips. I'm known as the guy who gets things done and good process improvement skills. That would be my pitch.
Short and simple.
Exactly. So, if they want more, they can elaborate.
So what, in your opinion, then, what makes for a memorable interview? Meaning, once the candidate has finished, they've left the building, what makes that candidate continue to stand out in the company's mind?
I think that there's a couple milestones here. Were they able to answer all the questions appropriately? Were they able to project themselves well? Were they succinct enough, but were they elaborate enough to get the answer to the question that was asked? Did they ask thought-provoking questions during their segment? And then did they close strong? That's that 3-step process that I talk about. When I say close, I mean stand up, look them in the eye, shake their hand and say, "I'm excited about this opportunity. I want you to know you give me a shot at this. I promise you won't be disappointed in the work that I'll do for you."
Okay.
And let it be sincere.
Good. So when the interview's over, I know that you probably get a phone call from the company. And so out of all those phone calls that you've received, what would you classify as the top mistake that you hear about that job seekers make during the actual interview?
I've heard some funny ones, but that's probably not the top mistake. I had a gentleman, I'll tell you the sidebar here. I had a gentleman that went out, he was interviewing in Florida, went out to his car, and I was debriefing with the hiring manager and HR. They had me on conference call. She had a window office to the parking lot. And they're telling me about the interview, how much they like him. They look over. He's in his underwear as he's changing in the parking lot. So don't do that, okay?
Wow.
So I think that probably the top mistake relates to that, though, is I think people forget that the interview starts a lot sooner than you're in the building. You got to be on your P's and Q's. You got to get your mind in the right place. You got to be well prepared. You've got to come in prepared. You got to come in and take it serious. I've had people tell me that they didn't take it serious, and at the end of the year, they were kicking themselves because they didn't take it serious because it's exactly what they wanted now. So even if you're on the fence and you're going in, take it serious. You want the ability to say no thank you to the offer.
Okay, I want to spend a few minutes now to discuss the philosophy that you're instilling at Tyges. And I know that you believe that everything about recruiting must change. So I'm curious, what is it that you think needs improvement about recruiting today?
Just about everything. I think the model's a mess, to be quite frank with you. And I don't think it's going to be fast enough. I don't think it's going to provide the quality of talent that's going to be out there in the future that's needed by companies to be successful. So I think it's going to start with the front end between how clients and individuals speak. You can't just pop a job description over to the recruiter and say, go find this person. Because 9 times out of 10, when we get job descriptions, they're wrong. It's not what they're looking for. When you talk to the hiring manager, you get the true crux of what they're looking for. I think it's got to be faster. Interviewing a person, putting them on hold for a month doesn't work anymore because it's a two-way interview. I think that how we find people, as I mentioned earlier, there's so much noise out there between everything. You can't weed through all the noise. For example, my firm used to post things on the boards years ago. We stopped posting about 5-6 years ago because there was too much noise. We're going to go get the people. We're going to go into companies and get the people. And that's so counterintuitive to most of the recruiters that are out there. They still use the post and pray mentality. This is about going and headhunting. That's the true gift that's there. Go use your skill set. Most headhunters that are out there, I tell you, 90% of them don't know how to headhunt. They know how to post and pray. I think the way we treat people along the way has to change. One of the biggest gripes that I hear most people say is the recruiter never called me back. I don't understand that. Unless and if it happens once or twice, I get it. We're all human. But when it's your normal MO, it's embarrassing. You give us a bad name. Close the loop. Explain. Even if you don't have an explanation, call them, tell them, I don't know, but they're not moving forward with you. That's okay to give them that, but at least close the loop with them. So there's almost too much to tell you that has to change. We know that we want to flip this thing on its head. We may want to change some pricing models. We may want to change some interviewing models. We're looking at a lot of different avenues right now, but it's definitely got to change. The level of sophistication of a recruiter has gone through the roof. Ryan, I'm sure you've interviewed over the course of years with different recruiters. I'm sure you've seen good ones, and I'm sure you've seen terrible ones.
That's true.
Yeah, you can't go out and hire a guy who used to work at the donut shop down the street just because he'll make 100 phone calls. This is more than just phone calls. This is about the ability to connect and relate with people much beyond the job level, much beyond the career level, but to get to know a person personally and understand what their desires, how you can impact and change their lives. And same thing on the client side. Ultimately what I want my client to do after our conversation is to hang up the phone and go, I'm not worried about this. You want to know why? Because Tim Saumier or Tyges is on the job. He or she, they're worried about it more than I am. They're going to get this thing done. Because the pain is in the hiring manager. They've got when there's a gap there, they're the ones that are filling that gap themselves, and they've got the pain. They're working 80 hours a week. Okay. That's just some examples.
Yeah, good examples. Last question on this, and I think we'll start to wrap things up. But how, in your view, how does Tyges best serve the job seekers, and what makes Tyges stand out from other recruiting firms?
We have a saying for the job seeker that we can't help everybody out there. We know that. We're specialists, but what we can do to them is we can be honest with them. And the saying is we can leave them better off than they were before they talked to us. And so if a person calls up and they're a pharmaceutical sales rep, first thing I'm going to say to them is, listen, person, I can't help you. It's not our specialty, but let me give you 3 or 4 tips that might be able to direct you on your search. And we do that. We do that for as many people as we can. We try to give them at least a general, I won't call it a referral, but we give them 3 or 4 steps on what they can do to help themselves. And we also tell them that, remember, the number one recruiter for you when you're looking for a job is you. It's not a guy like me, because guess what? I'm working 20 different jobs at a time. I'm working with 100 people at the time. So you're not going to get a little bit of my attention. You're going to get you're going to be the person focused on you. When you're looking for a job, it's a full-time job in itself. So I would tell them that's kind of how we differ. We don't just not answer phone calls. We don't just delete voicemails. We try to respond to everybody. Are we perfect? By no means. By no means. What was the second part of the question? I lost that.
Just what makes Tyges stand out from everybody else? And I think you've actually already described that. It's no secret. I have worked with recruiters before, as most professionals have. And I think my experience has always been there's some recruiters who will try to sell you a job, whether it's right for you or not, versus flat out say to you, no, that's not what we do. And, what you just said is what I wished others would have done years ago, which is, no, we don't do that, but here are people that do.
Yeah, I agree.
Last couple questions here. If you could leave the audience with just one tip that would help them in their job search and or their current careers, what would it be?
Before you start to look for a job, get your backyard in order. Get your resume cleaned up. Have somebody that look at it, look for the errors, look for the basics. Get your 30-second elevator speech. Figure out who you are. Be able to pitch it. Because you asked me earlier that question. You got to know who you are. Take care of your online profile. Make sure that what you're saying on Facebook to your buddy from college, it's going to show up. And it may, whether you've taken it down or not, we heard of things called cached in Google, and people can pick up on that. So be careful of that.
Yeah, once it's online, it's there forever.
Exactly. Get your references lined up. Make sure you know what they're going to say about you. A lot of people assume they'll give you references, and then you call them like, oh man, I haven't talked to him in 10 years, and it's all negative, or it's not. It's let's just say it's average at best. Well, you just gave me somebody that you swore up and down was going to give you a great reference. Well, that tells me you're not taking the job serious. Tells me you're not taking the search serious. By the way, you gave me a reference that gave you average marks. So why would I want to represent you to my client? So I say get your backyard cleaned up and be prepared as you go to the marketplace. As you go to the marketplace, I'm giving you more than you asked for here, but
that's okay.
Yeah, don't try to apply to every job out there. Figure out what you think the next thing is and put your heart and effort into that. Now, be realistic. If you're a manufacturing engineer, your next job is not going to be VP of Global Operations for $1 billion company. So put some realism in there, and figure out what's the next path for you and focus on there. Don't get drawn away by other things. That'd be some advice I would give someone.
Okay. Last question. What is the best way for people to reach you or to learn more about Tyges and maybe any of the positions that you might currently be looking to fill?
Easy. Tyges.com. And, all our contact information is out there. We don't hide our contact information. Tyges is spelled Tyges.com. So it's real easy. And that'd be the best way to look at it.
All right, Tim, I want to thank you for being on the show today and also for having the distinction of being the very first guest on the Brand New You show. And I want to wish you and everyone at Tyges the best of luck.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate your help, bud.
Wow, what an interview. Tim dropped some terrific advice and insight for those of us seeking to create a brand new you. Frankly, his advice isn't just limited to job seekers. There's some great value in this show for other recruiters as well. When Tim says he's out to reinvent recruiting, it definitely showed during this interview. So some of my key takeaways from this episode include the importance of having a good online presence from a recruiter's point of view. And by the way, if you're interested, you can get a head start on your competition in this area by heading on over to DIYwebsiteguy.com and signing up for a free step-by-step video instruction course on how to build a website using WordPress. Some of my other key takeaways include why you need to have a career plan and what you should consider when you're building one. Things that we as job seekers should consider when looking at a recruiter. So when a recruiter calls us, they're looking for certain specific skills and things about us. We also need to be considering what it is that we're looking for in that recruiter. The 3 different parts of every interview and when an interview actually starts and what not to do once it's over. For example, standing in the parking lot in your underwear. Sounds like common sense to most of us, but apparently it's not to everyone. Tim also does a great job of answering the tell us about yourself question by giving us an example of how he would answer it if he were asked during an interview. And his answer is short, succinct, to the point, and just fantastic. And finally, I think just the importance of getting your backyard in order before you start looking for a job. This is probably something that a lot of people underestimate, and yet it's so important to our career success and to our interview success. There's just so much fantastic stuff in this interview. I guarantee that you're going to need to listen to it twice to pick up on everything. So once again, Tim, thank you for being a guest on the Brand New You show. Now, for you listeners out there, if you're looking to get your backyard in order, head on over to thepersonalbrandingblueprint.com. The Personal Branding Blueprint is an online training course designed to help you get your backyard in order. If you're looking for a way to differentiate yourself and stand out in today's tough job market, the Personal Branding Blueprint can help. Sign up today and watch the first part of this Tim step-by-step video instructional course absolutely free. Now, in closing, I'd like to thank all the listeners once again. I know you have many choices for podcasts to listen to, and I am humbled that you choose to put me into your ears. And my promise to you, as listeners of this show, is that I will always strive to give you the value you deserve in order to help you become a brand new you. So until next time, I've been Ryan, and I'm out.